All right, so are you ready to dive into a story about money and power?
I am always ready for that.
Well, good, because today we're talking about the history of the Indian rupee.
Oh, a group B.
Yeah, from ancient empires
Oh, wow.
to uh, British colonialism,
Right.
all the way to the modern day struggle against the U.S. dollar.
It's a fascinating story.
It is.
And a lot of people don't realize
Yeah.
how much history is packed into every dollar, every rupee,
Yeah, it really is. It's
every yen.
it's a story that might change the way you think about money, global power,
Yeah.
and maybe even your next vacation.
Right, or where you decide to invest next.
Exactly. So we're basing this deep dive on a YouTube video by Gaurav Sakur.
Oh, I've seen his stuff. He's great.
Yeah, he's really good. He does a brilliant job of breaking down
Yeah.
this complex economic saga.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so are you ready to time travel?
Let's do it.
Okay, because we're going all the way back to the Indus Valley civilization
Wow.
around 3100 BC.
Okay, so way back.
Way back.
Mm.
Even back then, you could see the seeds of India's economic prowess.
What do you mean?
Well, the Indus Valley civilization was incredibly sophisticated.
Really?
Yes, with trade networks that spanned across continents.
That's incredible for that time period.
I know, it's crazy. They even had major shipping ports like Lothal and Sukagandor connecting them to the world long before Amazon Prime was a thing.
Right, like they were the original globalists.
Exactly. Okay, so they were already trading pros.
Right.
But what really blows my mind is as we move into the Mauryan Empire,
Okay.
around 321 BC, they introduced a standardized silver currency under Chandragupta Maurya.
Oh, wow.
It's like they were laying the groundwork for a modern economy thousands of years ago.
Yeah, they were ahead of their time.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the currency. They also implemented income tax.
What?
Yeah, and custom duty.
Really? That's amazing.
It suggests a deep understanding of economic management
Yeah.
and a government that was actively involved in its financial systems.
Sounds pretty sophisticated for back then.
I know. So they were collecting taxes,
Wow.
managing trade, and minting coins.
It sounds like a pretty advanced setup for that time.
It was. And this economic sophistication continued to flourish under the Gupta dynasty in the 6th century AD. Now they decided to up the ante
Okay.
and switch to a gold-based currency.
Ooh, gold.
Yeah. And this wasn't just for show.
Right.
It was a reflection of their incredible wealth.
Yeah, but how wealthy are we talking?
Get this. During the Gupta period, India held a staggering 32% share of the world's GDP.
32%.
32%. To put that in perspective, imagine the economic clout China has now.
Yeah.
India had that, but centuries ago.
That's mind-blowing.
I know. It's like they were the economic rock stars of the ancient world.
So what were they producing
Right.
that made them so dominant?
Well, India was like a manufacturing powerhouse,
Okay.
with each region specializing in different high-demand goods.
Oh, interesting.
Bengal was churning out silk. Gujarat was the textile hub.
Mm-hmm.
Jammu was famous for its luxurious shawls.
Oh, nice.
And Bihar was known for its exquisite carpets.
So like high-quality stuff.
Top-notch craftsmanship and a diverse range of products.
Yeah.
And don't forget the spices. I mean, the Malabar coast was basically the spice capital of the world.
Right. Everybody wanted those spices.
Everyone wanted a piece of that black gold, as they called black pepper back then.
It was like the oil of its day.
Exactly. The demand for Indian goods was through the roof.
So basically everybody wanted what India had.
Yeah. And this brings us to a crucial point. Currency exchange value. You know how your dollar doesn't stretch as far when traveling to Europe?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, India's currency used to be the strong one, like the euro is today.
Interesting.
High demand for Indian goods meant a high demand for Indian currency.
Uh-huh.
And that translated into serious economic power.
So ancient India was basically winning at the economic game.
They were killing it. They had a strong currency,
Yeah.
diverse industries, and a global reach.
Sounds like a pretty good setup.
It was. But then things took a bit of a turn.
Oh, no. What happened?
Enter British colonialism.
Okay,
And that, unfortunately, is where we see the beginning of the rupee's fall from grace.
so the British came in
Yeah.
and messed things up.
They did. The British implemented a series of policies that were, let's just say, less than favorable
Less than favorable.
for the Indian economy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Spill the tea. What did they do?
Well, first they decided to link the rupee to silver,
Uh-huh.
which was less valuable than gold. Imagine someone downgrading your platinum credit card to a basic one.
Ouch.
It instantly diminishes its value.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's a sneaky move. But it gets worse.
Oh, no, it gets worse.
Oh, it definitely gets worse. They then made it mandatory for all trade with India to be conducted in rupees.
Okay.
So this clever maneuver effectively prevented the inflow of precious metals into India, further weakening the currency. It's like they were deliberately choking off India's economic oxygen supply.
So they devalued the currency and then blocked access to other forms of wealth.
It's brutal. And as if that wasn't enough, they then established the 1890 Indian Currency Committee.
Okay.
And pegged the rupee to the British pound at a fixed exchange rate. Now, this might sound like a stabilizing move.
Right.
But in reality, it solidified the rupee's subservient position.
Wait, didn't you say the rupee was historically stronger than the pound?
Yeah.
How could they just peg them as equals?
That's the thing. They couldn't. The fixed exchange rate of 1 pound to 1 rupee was intentionally set low, despite the rupee's previous higher value.
So they rigged the system.
It was a blatant power play to maintain British economic dominance.
To keep the rupee down, even though it should have been worth more.
Exactly. And this manipulation had lasting consequences, shaping the trajectory of the Indian economy for generations to come. It's like they threw a wrench into the gears of India's economic engine.
Yeah.
And the effects are still being felt today.
It's amazing how these historical events can have such a ripple effect.
I know. It's crazy. So we have India starting as this economic superstar.
Right.
And then colonialism comes in.
Yeah.
And really throws things off balance.
It's a stark contrast, for sure. And it sets the stage for the challenges India would face in the modern era as it tries to reclaim its economic independence.
This is where it gets really interesting, because while the British were busy undermining the rupee, a new global power was on the rise.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. dollar.
Here we go.
And that, my friend, is a whole other chapter of this epic economic saga.
Can't wait to hear about it.
But we'll have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
I'm already hooked. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Indian rupee.
Okay, so where we left off, the rupee was not in a very good place.
No, not really. Thanks to those British economic policies.
Right. But as they say, when one door closes, another one opens.
That's right.
And in this case, as the British pound started to weaken, a new currency was waiting in the wings, the U.S. dollar.
The dollar's rise to global dominance is a story in itself.
It really is. So was it a hostile takeover?
Not quite.
Okay.
But it was definitely a power shift.
Okay, give us the play-by-play.
All right, well, World War I really shook things up.
Okay.
And the British pound took a major hit.
How so?
Panic withdrawals, people were scared.
Right.
And then the excessive printing of lower denomination notes, all that led to devaluation.
So too much money chasing too few goods.
Exactly. Classic inflation.
We're seeing that now.
Right. History often repeats itself.
So the pound is down but not out.
Right.
Did the U.S. dollar just swoop in and take over?
Not exactly a swoop, but it was a strategic move.
Okay. How so?
Well, during the war, the U.S. lent billions of dollars to war-torn nations.
Oh, wow.
And that led to widespread adoption of the dollar.
For international transactions.
Exactly. They were providing financial support, but also positioning the dollar as the go-to.
I see. So it was a long game.
It was very smart.
Using their financial muscle to boost the dollar.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about World War II? Did that solidify the dollar's dominance?
Oh, absolutely. World War II cemented the dollar's place on the world stage.
Okay, how? So.
Well, countries needed weapons and supplies desperately.
Right.
And they were paying for them in gold.
With their gold reserve.
Yes. By the end of the war, the U.S. held 75% of the world's gold.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
It was a golden opportunity, you could say.
I see what you did there.
So the U.S. basically cornered the market on gold.
Right. So how did that translate to the dollar becoming the world's reserve currency?
Well, that's where the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement comes in.
Okay, what was that?
This agreement basically pegged the U.S. dollar to gold, establishing it as the world's reserve currency.
Okay, so the U.S. dollar became the universal language of finance.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, that's a powerful position to be in.
It is a double-edged sword, though.
What do you mean?
On one hand, a globally accepted reserve currency brings stability.
Right.
It makes trade easier. But on the other hand, it can make a country's economy vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what?
To fluctuations in the value of that reserve currency.
Which in this case is the U.S. dollar.
Right. It's like being on a seesaw.
Right. If the dollar goes up, you go up. If it goes down, you go down too.
Exactly. And the global financial markets are very unpredictable.
They are. So where did the rupee stand in all this?
Especially after India gained independence.
Right.
Well, India faced a lot of challenges in the post-independence era.
Like what?
Well, there was the excitement of freedom, the hope for a better future.
Right.
but also the daunting task of rebuilding an economy that had been exploited for centuries.
Right, and they had to do it all in this new world order where the U.S. dollar reigned supreme.
Exactly. They had to navigate all of that.
It must have been incredibly difficult.
It was. And there were wars.
Wars with Pakistan.
Yes. And then the oil crises of the 1970s.
Oh, right when energy prices went through the roof.
Exactly. And then India almost went bankrupt in 1991.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And then the 2008 global financial crisis.
So every time they tried to get back on their feet, something else knocked them down.
It seemed that way. It felt like a constant uphill battle.
And now the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right, that's added another layer of complexity.
With supply chain disruptions and inflation.
Yes, and it's created a lot of uncertainty.
And on top of all that, we have those Trump-era policies.
That Gaurav Thakur talks about.
Right, which could potentially devalue the rupee even further.
Exactly. It's a lot to deal with.
So before we jump into those Trump-era policies,
Okay.
I want to understand why they matter so much.
Okay.
Like, why should our listeners care about something that one U.S. president did years ago?
That's a great question. And it all comes down to understanding how interconnected the global economy really is.
Okay.
You see, decisions made in one part of the world can have ripple effects across continents.
Okay, so those policies enacted during Trump's presidency.
Those are a prime example.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What were they?
Well, there were 3 key policy areas.
Okay.
Increased import tariffs on goods from countries like India,
Okay.
income tax cuts for Americans,
Right.
and stricter immigration policies.
Specifically targeting H-1B visa holders.
Yes. Now, those policies seem focused on domestic U.S. issues,
Right.
but they can create a perfect storm for the Indian rupee.
Okay, so let's break down each of those policies
Okay.
and see how they connect to the rupee's fate.
Right.
Let's start with those import tariffs.
Okay.
How could making it more expensive to import goods from India impact the rupee's value?
Well, if American businesses and consumers have to pay more for Indian goods
Right.
because of the tariffs,
Uh-huh.
they're going to buy less.
Right.
Less demand for Indian products means less demand for Indian rupees
Oh, I see.
to
What?
pay for those products.
Less demand for rupees means
A weaker rupee.
it's the basic principle of supply and demand.
Exact.
Okay, so now let's move on to those income tax cuts.
Okay.
When Americans have more money in their pockets, they tend to spend more, which leads to inflation.
Right. And to combat inflation, the U.S. Federal Reserve might raise interest rates,
Okay.
making the U.S. a more attractive place for global investors.
So suddenly investing in India seems less appealing,
Right.
and investors start pulling their money out,
Yes, they sell their Indian assets.
which means they're selling rupees,
And buying dollars.
driving the value of the rupee down even further.
It's a domino effect.
Okay, so tariffs and tax cuts can create a ripple effect that weakens the rupee.
Yes.
But what about those immigration policies?
Yeah.
How do they fit into all of this?
Well, if fewer Indians are able to get those H-1B visas
Right.
to work in the U.S., that means less money is being sent back to India.
In the form of remittances.
Exactly.
And those remittances are a lifeline for so many Indian families.
Yes. And a vital source of foreign currency for the Indian economy.
So if those remittances dry up,
It puts even more pressure on the rupee.
like cutting off another source of income.
Right.
And all of this has led the State Bank of India
One of the country's leading financial institutions.
to issue a pretty stark warning.
They're forecasting that the rupee could plummet to a record low of 90 against the U.S. dollar.
If these trends continue.
Yes, it's a serious concern.
So the situation is not looking good. But is there any hope for the rupee?
That's a good question.
Can India break free from this dollar dependency?
It's a tough challenge, but it's not impossible.
Okay, so how can they do that?
We'll explore those solutions in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back. And we've been talking about the Indian rupee, and it's been a wild ride.
It has. From ancient superpower to struggling with this dollar dependency.
Right. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But the big question is, what can India do about it?
Yeah, is there any way to turn the ship around?
Can they break free from the dollar and chart their own course?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, but it's not hopeless. There are steps India can take to strengthen the rupee.
Okay, so what's the game plan?
Gaurav Thakur actually outlines a few potential solutions in his video.
Oh, okay. What are they?
Well, one key strategy is reducing India's reliance on oil imports. By transitioning to cleaner, renewable energy sources.
So like solar, wind, hydroelectric power.
Exactly. Anything that reduces the need to buy oil from other countries.
Which means they need fewer dollars.
Exactly. It's like taking back control of your own destiny.
I like that. Okay, what else?
Well, there's the Make in India initiative.
Right, I've heard of that.
It aims to boost domestic manufacturing
Uh-huh.
and reduce reliance on imports, especially from China.
So become more self-reliant.
Exactly. It would create jobs, stimulate economic growth.
And reduce the outflow of rupees.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes sense. What about attracting more foreign investment?
That's another important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, if investors see India as a stable and attractive place,
Uh-huh.
that could increase demand for rupees,
Exactly.
which strengthens the currency.
It's a positive feedback loop.
More investment, stronger rupee. More investment.
Exactly.
But all of this sounds long-term.
It is a long-term strategy.
Are there things India can do right now to kind of cushion the blow?
Yeah, there are some short-term measures.
Like what?
Diversifying export markets,
Okay.
promoting trade in local currencies,
Mm-hmm.
strengthening financial institutions.
So basically building a more resilient economy.
Exactly. One that can weather those global storms.
Okay, so it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
Reduce dependence on imports,
Yeah.
boost domestic production,
Uh-huh.
attract foreign investment,
Right.
and shore up those financial defenses.
It's a tall order, but India has a history of resilience and innovation.
They've faced down economic storms before,
They have.
and they can do it again.
I believe so.
This deep dive has been fascinating.
It has.
It's amazing how currency is so intertwined with history
And politics.
and global economics.
It really is. It's a reminder that everything is connected. Decisions made in one part of the world can impact everyone else.
Exactly. So where does that leave us? What's the final takeaway for our listeners?
Well, the future of the Indian rupee, like the global economy itself, is uncertain.
There are challenges and opportunities.
But one thing is clear. India's economic fate is linked to the global landscape.
And their ability to navigate these forces will determine the rupee's future.
It will.
So can India reclaim its former economic glory?
That's the question.
Can they achieve true currency independence?
We encourage you to think about that, to explore the potential of initiatives like Make in India, and consider the role each of us can play in shaping India's economic future.
That's a great point. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Indian rupee. It's been a wild ride.
It has. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring.